I thought I continued. I am sort of determined to finish it today, but let's see. I'm reading out of Winged Pharaoh. It is a far memory of Joan Grant, who passed away in 1989. She describes her memory from this time before the flood, before Babylon. She is a co-ruler of Calm with her brother. They have just defeated the Zumas, and we are here in part 8, chapter 1, Noonday of my mother. When my mother died, I prayed to the gods that I might not shadow her noonday by my sorrow. She left earth smoothly and quietly as a sailing boat drifts downstream on the cool wind of sunset. It was as if she had lived in a house with closed shutters and had opened a door upon a garden where dreams were flowering in their glory, for she had walked out into the light and seen my father waiting for her. Her body joined my father's in the tomb of Abitwa. Beside her, as she had wished, was placed a painted wooden chest, which long ago Nea had made for her. In it she had kept the presents we had given to her and to our father when we were children, little slips of ivory on which I had written her name, while I still found it difficult to scribe, pieces of broken limestone on which Nea had practiced carving, and 2 ivory game pieces of a set that he had started to make for her and never finished. In her sarcophagus, she still wore the bracelet that we had given to her when I was 9, and with her were put many other things that she had been fond of, a little statuette of Shamba, my father's lioness, and some painted pottery which we had brought home from Minoas when we stayed with Kiodas. When the tomb of the great Atet was opened, the flowers that I had put there when I was a little girl, like soft brown shadows, still held their petaled shape. Before my mother joined her husband, the room was filled with fresh garlands, as for a bridal, and their bodies slept side beside each other, even as their spirits rejoiced together. Chapter 2, Children of Pharaoh. Though I could never meet my mother in my spirit on earth, I was often lonely for her counsel and her understanding. I had always told her of the things that troubled me, and the light of her wisdom had driven forth the shadows of my uncertainty, so that I knew my own heart and could see the path clearly before me. While Den was still a child, I thought that as she grew older I should find with her that same harmony which I shared with my mother. But though we loved each other and our thoughts often reached the same destination, we travelled these upon different paths. I have always wanted to know the reason for things. All my life I've had dreams and visions and known their reality, but I was never content until I learned how I saw them, for I wished to know the laws and not only to see them in action. If I see a tree beautiful against the sunset, I see it not only with my heart, but with my mind. I know why I find it beautiful, which line it is that gives the rhythm that to my mind is beauty. But to Den a thing is beautiful or ugly, an action is good or evil, not because of reason, but because she knows it in her heart. Sometimes she used to laugh at me and say that I tried to explain why the curve of one jar was more satisfying than the curve of another was, as if one should pull a flower to pieces to discover the secret of its perfume. I hoped that she would go to the temple of Atet as I had done, but she was impatient of priestly things, and I knew that to force my will upon her would be as useless as to try to tame a wild leopard by shutting it away behind bars. Yet she had wisdom, without knowing from whence it came, and she could weigh hearts without knowing the scales. From the time she was 12 years old, she often sat beside me when I was in audience, and before I gave judgment, she made a private sign to tell me whether she thought the one before me was innocent or guilty. I weighed hearts with the facts of earth and the wisdom of the spirit, but many times I found that Den had known the truth before I had. At first I thought that she must be a seer, but that was not so. She would say, I know things, but I don't know why I know them, and I don't mind. Though she would not undergo the training of a priest as time went by, I was sure that her judgments would be worthy of the scales under which she would sit when she was Pharaoh. Den always went with Nea when he made his yearly progress to the garrisons. He used to take her hunting with him in the south, and she said that no lion's spear sped more truly than hers, and no arrow was more swiftly judged. Although she was Dio's child, I think she was more Nea's son than she was my daughter. Nea had 4 daughters by his secondary wives, but his only son was Seshet, who had been 2 years old when I became Pharaoh. Until he was 7, he lived with his mother in the women's quarter, but after she died, he shared with Den the apartments of the royal children, which had been ours when we were young. He was like his father, as the shadow of a tree is like a tree, and I think that she used to pray not to the gods, but in the image of Nea that he held in his breast, in his heart. He would have found happiness in the life of a healer priest or a man of learning, but because Nea was a warrior pharaoh, he longed to follow in his path. He spent much time in the room of records. He would climb up to a high shelf and bring down a papyrus that for many years had not had its sealing threads untied, and unroll it as eagerly as a child listens to a storyteller. He would read old judgments of Menes and of his grandfather, and lists of the ways in which tribute had been expended in different years. The scribes' plans for the building of a new road or for a new system of waste channels, which long ago become familiar to the people of Kham, were as fresh to him as the day on which they were born in the minds of the men who had designed them. Nea was always very gentle with his son, and he used to take him wildfowling, though he thought that he had very little skill with arrows. But once I saw Seshet practicing at the target of a flowering papyrus reed that was swaying in the wind. He transferred it with 3 arrows before he saw me watching him. Then I realized that when he missed a flying swan, it was not because he could not hit it, but because he hated to destroy its perfection. I told him to explain to Nea that he didn't like killing birds, but he made me promise to keep his secret, and I did so, for I knew that it would give Seshet more pain to admit to anything that he thought a weakness than to be laughed at for being unskilled. I told him that there are many roads to freedom, and that he who attains freedom in the way of a scribe has as splendid a courage as he who attains it in the way of a warrior. But I could not make him realize that what he possessed was not cowardice, but compassion. His present was always overcast by his future, for Seshet could see the shadows that would be thrown by everything he did. If Den swerved her chariot too swiftly and it was nearly overturned, she never thought of what would have happened if it had tilted a little further, but to Seshet, who watched her, what might have happened was almost as vivid as if it had come to pass, and his bones ached. So keen was his vision of the hurt that she might have received. Yet deeply within him shone the flame of true courage that does not run back, although it can see the unmasked face of danger. He had given his heart to Den ever since she was a baby, and Nea and I always hoped that they would marry and rule after us together. Den was the royal heir, and unless she married Seshet, she would rule alone, and he would not be Pharaoh. If I had not had a child, Nea could have declared any of his children the royal heir, and if he had had no children, he would, after consulting with his seer priests, have declared one old in spirit to the next son of Horus. When Dan was 14, the time came for her betrothal to Seshet to be announced to the people, so that all should know then as rulers, when Nea and I handed on the crook and flail. To Seshet, Dan was the son of his Noonday. When she was with him, there could be no shadows, and when she was away from him, the sky was without stars. But she loved him only as a brother, and within her heart he could not kindle the brilliant flame that lovers know. And because of his love for her, he saw her heart, and he knew that, as his wife, she would never find the happiness at full circle that another man could give her, who was not only a brother to her spirit, but also the lover that her body had chosen. To Seshet, marriage with Dan meant to have her who was the breath of his nostrils for his wife, and the crown of Pharaoh. But he loved her beyond possession and beyond power, and greater than this, he loved her beyond pride. He longed to be Pharaoh because the crook that he would then hold would have been Nea's, and because the crown that he would then wear would have been worn by Nea. He knew that he would have been forbidden this denial of his heritage if he told his father that he gave up the succession to the throne because he loved the woman that he would have shared it with. So Seshet told his father that he could not be Pharaoh because he dared not lead the royal chariots into battle. Nea loved him, and as he listened to him, his heart sorrowed that he would have no son to follow him. But he knew that the boy was long in years to have gained humility, which so few gain until in the gaining of it they are almost at the end of their journey. And he thought that Seshet was wise, beyond the understanding of scholars, to have weighed his own heart, and knowing that he was not a leader of warriors, to have put off the war helmet of Pharaoh and laid down the flail. So Nea made Seshet the vizier of Nekatan, and the land of the lotus was shepherded by his compassion. I finished this here, chapter 2 that was. Next one is Den and Horemka.